My husband divorced me by SMS while I was visiting our son. I'm leaving and moving in with my new woman. I'm taking all the money and property with me. I calmly replied, "Of course, dear." When he realized what I had done, it was already too late. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when I first knew. And honestly, I knew long before I was willing to admit it to myself. My name is Dorothy Callahan. I was 63 years old when my husband of 38 years decided to end our marriage by text message. 38 years. I had met Gerald when I was 25, a stubborn young woman from Columbus, Ohio, who thought she had the whole world figured out. We had built a life together. A 3-bedroom house in suburban Cincinnati, a son named Michael, a vegetable garden in the backyard that I tended every spring with the kind of patience that only comes from loving something deeply. Gerald sold insurance. I had worked as an office administrator for a dental practice for 22 years before retiring. We were not rich, but we were comfortable, or so I believed. The warning signs had started about 2 years before the text. Looking back, they seem almost embarrassingly obvious. Gerald began working late. Not occasionally, the way he always had during busy seasons, but consistently, every Tuesday and Thursday, and then Fridays too. He changed the password on his phone. He started going to the gym, which he had never done in his life, and came home smelling of a cologne I did not recognize and had certainly never bought him. When I asked about it once, casually, over dinner, he said a client had given it to him as a gift. I believed him. Or rather, I chose to believe him, which is a different thing entirely. There were other signs. He stopped watching television with me in the evenings. He became irritable when I asked simple questions about his day. He took 2 solo fishing trips that year. Gerald, who had not held a fishing rod since 1997. Our joint bank account, which I checked perhaps once a month, began showing cash withdrawals I could not account for. 200 here, 300 there. I told myself we were fine. I told myself every long marriage had its rough patches. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. Her name, I would later find out, was Renee. She was 41 years old, worked at Gerald's agency as a junior sales associate, and had apparently been seeing my husband for approximately 14 months before everything came apart. She was younger, yes. Wasn't she always? But what hurt more than her age was the realization of how long I had been made a fool of, right inside my own home, at my own kitchen table, in my own bed. The Friday it happened, I was at Michael's house in Dayton. Michael and his wife, Karen, had just had their second child, a little girl named Lily, and I had gone to help for a few days. I was sitting in their living room holding Lily while Karen napped, feeling that particular warmth that only grandchildren can give you, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Gerald. "Dorothy, I want you to know I have made my decision. I am leaving. I am moving in with Renee. I am taking the money from our joint accounts and I will be removing the items from the house that are rightfully mine. I think it is better this way. Please do not make this difficult." Gee, I read it twice. Then a third time. Lily made a small sound in my arms and I looked down at her tiny face and I thought, 38 years, and this is what it comes to. A text message. Not even a phone call. A text message. With a dash and an initial, as though we were business acquaintances concluding a transaction. Did he think I would fall apart? Did he think I would call him, sobbing, begging? Did he think 63 years of living had taught me nothing? I set my phone down. I adjusted Lily against my shoulder, and then I typed back slowly and deliberately with perfectly steady hands. "Of course, darling." 2 words. That was all I sent. And even as I pressed send, something cold and clear settled into the center of my chest. Not grief, not panic, but something much more useful. Something that felt, if I am honest, almost like relief, because Gerald had made one very serious mistake. He had assumed, as people so often do, that a quiet woman is a helpless one. He was about to learn otherwise. I did not tell Michael that night. He had a newborn daughter and a tired wife, and a look on his face that a mother recognizes immediately. That particular combination of joy and exhaustion and barely concealed terror that comes with new parenthood. I was not going to walk into his kitchen and hand him my crisis alongside his. So I smiled. I helped Karen with dinner. I washed dishes. I played with their 4-year-old son, Danny, until his bedtime. And then I went to the guest room, closed the door quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. And I began to think. The first thing I thought about was money. Not sentimentally. I had time for sentiment later. But practically, the way you think when the floor has dropped out from underneath you and you need to figure out exactly how far you are going to fall. Gerald had said he was taking the money from our joint accounts. How much was in those accounts? I knew approximately. Our checking account held around $4,000, which we used for monthly expenses. Our joint savings account, the one we had been contributing to for years, the one meant for retirement, held just over $62,000. $62,000 that Gerald could legally access at any time because both our names were on it, which meant he could drain it completely before I got back to Cincinnati. Could he have already done it? My hands were not quite steady when I opened the banking app on my phone. The checking account, $4,112. Still there. The savings account. I held my breath. $62,408. Still there. He had not moved yet. Either he had sent the message impulsively and had not yet acted, or, more likely, he was waiting until I was still in Dayton, far enough away that he could clean out the accounts and move the contents of the house before I returned. I had perhaps 24 to 48 hours. The fear was real. I want to be honest about that because some people tell these stories as though they were never afraid, as though they moved through everything with unshakable calm. I was not unshakable. I sat on that guest bed for a good 20 minutes, feeling the particular terror of a woman who has just understood that the life she believed she had, the security, the shared future, the retirement she had worked 30 years toward, was in the process of being stolen from her. I was 63 years old. I did not have decades to rebuild. What Gerald was proposing to do was not simply a divorce. It was a demolition. But here is what I have learned about fear. It is only dangerous when it paralyzes you. When it moves through you and comes out the other side, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes clarity. I got up, turned on the lamp, and found a notepad in my purse. I sat down at the small desk by the window, and I made a list. The first item, separate the finances immediately. Tomorrow morning, before Gerald could act, I needed to contact our bank. I could not unilaterally drain a joint account without consequences. I knew enough to understand that. But I could transfer a significant portion to a personal account in my name only, an account Gerald could not touch. Was that the right move legally? I did not know yet, which brought me to the second item. The second item, find a lawyer, not eventually, not when I got home. Tomorrow. I had a friend from my church, Paulette, whose daughter had gone through a divorce 3 years ago. A bad one. A husband who had hidden assets, who had been difficult and vindictive. Paulette's daughter had come out of it reasonably intact, and I remembered Paulette mentioning the name of the attorney. Sandra Marsh, I thought, or Marsh something. I wrote it down with a question mark. The third item, and this one surprised me as it formed in my mind, documentation. If Gerald had been having an affair, and he clearly had, and if he was now attempting to hide marital assets or transfer property unlawfully before any legal proceedings began, I needed evidence, not for revenge, for protection. A divorce attorney would tell me what was and was not relevant, but my instinct said, document everything, touch nothing, and let him believe, for as long as possible, that I was simply complying. That was the seed of the plan. Small at that point. But seeds do not need to be large to grow into something substantial. The fourth thing I wrote down was harder. It was, tell Michael. Not now, not tonight, but soon. He was my son. He deserved to know. And practically speaking, I might need his help. Not financially, I would not do that to him. But the kind of help that only family can give. Moral scaffolding, my mother used to call it. The people who stand around you while you rebuild so you do not collapse inward. I looked at the list for a long time. Outside, the Ohio night was very quiet. Down the hall, Lily was sleeping in her crib, making that small breathing sound that newborns make. Gerald had sent me a text message and gone to sleep, I imagined, feeling like a man who had handled something neatly. He had not handled anything. He had simply started a process he did not yet understand. And tomorrow morning, before he had finished his first cup of coffee, I intended to begin handling things myself. I slept 4 hours. It was enough. I was up at 6. Michael and Karen's house was still quiet. Lily had been up twice in the night. I had heard it through the wall, and I had made myself stay in my room rather than intrude. They needed to find their rhythm with her. I dressed quickly and went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone and my notepad. The first call I made was to our bank. It was not yet 8 o'clock, so I navigated the automated system and then waited on hold for 11 minutes, which I spent reviewing what I was going to say. When a representative named Diane finally came on the line, I was calm and factual. I explained that I was a joint account holder and that I wished to transfer $30,000 from our joint savings account into a personal checking account in my name only, which I would like to open simultaneously. I explained that I was separating from my spouse and wished to secure my portion of marital assets pending legal proceedings. Diane put me on hold twice. There were forms involved, yes. As a joint account holder, I had full legal access to the funds. No, this was not fraudulent. And by 8:45, the transfer was complete. $30,000 moved to an account Gerald's name was not on and never would be. I had left the remainder in the joint account untouched. My attorney, whoever she turned out to be, could advise me on next steps. But $30,000 gave me a floor to stand on. The second call took longer to arrange. Paulette did not answer her cell, so I tried her home number, which I had memorized years ago. She picked up on the third ring. "Dorothy," she said, and even in that single word I could hear that she had not heard the news. "Good. What a surprise, honey. How's that new grandbaby?" "Beautiful," I said. "Paulette, I need Sandra Marsh's number, your daughter's divorce attorney." A pause. Paulette was not a slow woman. "Oh, Dorothy," she said softly. "I'm all right," I said. "I just need to move quickly." She gave me the number without another word, except, "She's good. She's really good." Sandra Marsh's office opened at 9. I had an appointment by 9:15, not with Sandra herself, but with her associate, a woman named Claire Devereaux, who had an opening that same afternoon due to a cancellation. I told Michael and Karen at breakfast that I had some errands to run and would be back by dinner. Michael looked at me with his father's eyes, Gerald's gray eyes, which I had always loved and now found complicated, and asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I was not ready yet. I drove to Claire Devereaux's office in a commercial building off Salem Avenue and sat in a waiting room with beige walls and a small water feature that trickled quietly in the corner. I had brought my notepad, the text message screenshot I had taken the night before, 3 months of bank statements I had emailed to myself from the online portal, and a list of assets I could recall off the top of my head. The house, The 2 cars, the savings, Gerald's 401k, my own smaller retirement account, the furniture, his boat, a 14-foot aluminum fishing boat he never actually used, and a storage unit on Reed Road, whose contents I was not entirely sure of. That storage unit, I wrote a small star next to it. Claire Devereaux was in her late 30s, precise and unsentimental in the way that good attorneys often are. She listened to my account without interrupting. She looked at the bank statement. She read the text message. When she looked up, she said, "You've already done the transfer this morning?" "Yes." "Good. That was the right instinct." She explained the legal landscape efficiently. Ohio was an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets were not automatically split 50-50, but divided in a way a court considered fair given the circumstances. Length of marriage, contributions of each spouse, economic circumstances at the time of divorce, all of it mattered. She told me to stop using joint credit cards immediately. She told me to document the contents of the house with photographs before I returned. She asked about the storage unit. "I don't know exactly what's in it," I said. "Find out," she said. It was on the drive back to Michael's house that the point of no return arrived. Not metaphorically, but literally, in the form of a phone call from my neighbor, Evelyn Marsh. No relation to the attorney. Evelyn was 70, sharp as a tack, and had lived next door to us for 19 years. "Dorothy," she said, "I don't want to upset you, but I think you need to know. Gerald is at the house with a woman and a moving van. They've been there since about 10 this morning." I pulled into a gas station parking lot. "How much have they taken?" I asked. "Furniture, mostly. The television, some boxes." "Dorothy?" She hesitated. "She's very young, and she's been directing the whole thing like she owns the place." That was when it became real in a way that no text message could have made it. Renee. In my house, pointing at my furniture. Standing in my kitchen. The kitchen where I had made Thanksgiving dinner for 22 years, where I had put butterfly bandages on Michael's knees, where Gerald and I had drunk coffee together every morning for 3 decades, and deciding what was worth taking. "Evelyn," I said carefully, "would you be willing to take photographs? Through your window, from your yard. Whatever you can get." "Already doing it, honey," she said. "Already doing it." I did not go back to Michael's house first. I called him from the gas station parking lot and told him I needed to make a slight detour, that I would explain later, and that he should not worry. Then I drove the 90 minutes to Cincinnati without stopping. I needed to see my house with my own eyes. And I needed Gerald to see me. The moving van was still there when I turned onto our street. A white rental truck backed up the driveway so that the rear was level with the front door. I recognized Gerald's car at the curb and, beside it, a silver Honda I did not know. Evelyn was standing in her front garden with a watering can that she was not really using, and she caught my eye as I pulled up and gave a small nod. I parked. I got out. I walked up my own front path. Gerald was in the living room when I opened the door. He was wrapping something in newspaper. I recognized the lamp that had been on the end table since 1999. And he startled when he saw me. He had the look of a man who had calculated that this moment would not happen, or at least not yet. "Dorothy," he said. "Gerald," I said. She came out of the kitchen doorway then. Renee. Younger than I had pictured, or perhaps just younger than I had allowed myself to picture. Dark hair, nice clothes, a look on her face that was simultaneously defensive and appraising. She was carrying 2 of my good mixing bowls. "Those were my mother's mixing bowls. You should put those down," I said to her, pleasantly. Something shifted in the room. Gerald set the lamp down. Renee did not set down the bowls. "Dorothy," Gerald said, using the tone he had always used when he thought I was about to be unreasonable, "I told you in my message." You told me quite a lot in your message, I said. And I said, of course. So here we are. I looked around the living room. I've already spoken to an attorney this afternoon, so from this point forward, any removal of property from this home may be considered unlawful dissipation of marital assets. I've documented what's here. My neighbor has photographs of what's already left, so I suggest you both stop. Gerald's face did something complicated. You went to an attorney already? This morning. Renee set the mixing bowls down on the coffee table. Not because she was complying, I thought, but because she was recalibrating. It was Gerald who lost his composure first. He told me I was being vindictive. He told me the house was half his and he had every right to take what he wanted. He told me that if I was going to be difficult, he had resources too. His brother Dennis was an attorney, and Dennis had already told him that in Ohio, a spouse had rights, and I could not simply— You're right, I said calmly. You do have rights, and so do I. That's what the legal process is for. He stepped closer. Not threateningly, exactly, but with the particular physical arrogance of a man who has rarely been held accountable. You moved money this morning, he said, from our account. $30,000. So he had checked. Of course he had. Yes, I said. I did. That's theft. It's a joint account, Gerald, asked Dennis. Renee spoke then, for the first time, in a voice that was surprisingly level. We're not going to let you drag this out and bleed us dry in legal fees, Dorothy. That's not going to happen. Gerald has things he could say about you too. Things that wouldn't look good. So before you decide to play hardball, maybe think about whether you really want this to get ugly. I looked at her for a moment. She was 41 years old, standing in my living room, making a threat she had not yet specified. I've been making things work for 38 years, I said. I'm not afraid of ugly. They left 20 minutes later with what they had already loaded. Gerald tried once more, in the driveway, lowering his voice to a register he used when he wanted something. A tone I had once found persuasive, which now felt like a stranger's accent. He said we could handle this quietly, without attorneys, that there was no reason for things to get expensive or complicated. I looked at him in the flat afternoon light and thought, you sent me a text message while I was holding your grandchild. Talk to my attorney, I said, and went inside. I called Claire Devereaux from the kitchen and reported the incident. She told me to file a formal notification of the attorney representation immediately, which her office would draft and send to Gerald, at which point all communication should be directed through counsel. She also told me to change the locks that evening, which was my legal right as a co-owner of the marital home while proceedings were pending. I had a locksmith there by 7 o'clock. The house felt strange that night. Gaps where furniture had been. The end table without its lamp. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the space on the counter where the mixing bowls had been, and I was glad Renee had put them back. I drove back to Dayton the next morning and finally told Michael everything. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Mom, what do you need? And I thought, that is what I need. I stayed 2 more days. I let Karen feed me soup and let Danny climb on me and held Lily until my arms were tired. I let myself rest because I knew there was more to come. The first attempt at seduction, and I use that word deliberately because it was a seduction of a particular kind, came on a Tuesday, 10 days after the text message. I had returned to Cincinnati by then, to the house with its new locks and its empty corners. I had begun the slow process of making the space feel like mine rather than a site of abandonment. I moved the armchair from the bedroom to where the couch had been, bought a lamp at the consignment store on Madison Road, began cooking real meals for myself instead of the toast and coffee I had been surviving on. Small acts of reclamation. Gerald called, which surprised me, since Claire had sent the formal representation letter, and he was supposed to be communicating through Dennis. He was not calling to negotiate. He was calling to reminisce. That is the only word for what it was. His voice was softer than it had been in years. He asked how I was settling in. He mentioned, seemingly in passing, a vacation we had taken to Myrtle Beach in 2009, the way I used to laugh at his terrible attempts at miniature golf. He said he had been thinking. He said he was not sure he had handled things well. He said perhaps they could talk, just the two of them, no attorneys, no formality, just Dorothy and Gerald the way things used to be. Was this sincere? I considered that possibility for approximately half a second. Number. What it was, I understood, was reconnaissance. He or Renee, and I suspected Renee, who struck me as the more strategically minded of the two, had realized that I was not falling apart, that I had moved money and hired counsel and changed the locks, and they were recalibrating. If I could be softened, if I could be drawn into an informal conversation and persuaded to drop my guard, perhaps I might agree to something off the record that would benefit them. Gerald, I said, you need to speak to Claire Devereaux. Dorothy, come on, we don't need… Claire Devereaux. Her number is on the letter Dennis received. I hung up. An hour later, I received a text from a number I did not recognize. It said, Dorothy, this is Renee. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'm not your enemy and I never wanted to hurt you. Can we meet for coffee? Woman to woman? I showed it to Claire at our next meeting. She photographed it for the file without comment. The days following had a particular texture to them. A watchful stillness, the way the air feels before weather changes. I knew they were observing, waiting to see if I would waver or make a mistake. Gerald's attorney, Dennis, was sending increasingly formal correspondence about the house, about the $30,000 transfer, about Gerald's right to access his personal possessions. Claire responded to each letter with precise, measured language. The back and forth was expensive and deliberate, and I suspected that was partly the point, to exhaust me financially and emotionally into settling for less than I was owed. I refused to exhaust, but the honest truth is that I needed help that attorneys could not provide, not legal help. Human help. The kind that comes from people who know you before you were someone's wife, someone's problem, someone's settlement figure. I called Paulette first, then Margaret from my book club, and then Lynn, who had been my closest friend since our children were in elementary school together, and who had been widowed 4 years ago and understood something about restructuring a life. I invited them to the house on a Thursday evening. I actually cooked, a pot roast, because cooking is how I have always thought clearly. And I told them the whole story from the beginning, all of it, without minimizing. They were, in different ways, exactly what I needed. Paulette was furious on my behalf, which was validating. Margaret was practical. She had contacts, she said, a financial advisor who specialized in women going through late-life divorce, someone who could help me understand my long-term picture. Lynn was quiet and steady in the way she always was, and when everyone else had said their piece, she looked at me across my kitchen table and said, "You're going to be all right, Dorothy. I know what not all right looks like, and this isn't it." I held on to that. Margaret's financial advisor, a woman named Patricia Ossie, with an office in Hyde Park, agreed to meet with me the following week. She was thorough and unsentimental, and she helped me understand what I was actually looking at. Gerald's 401k was the largest single asset in play, worth approximately $230,000, and as his spouse of 38 years, I was entitled to a significant portion of it regardless of who had initiated the divorce. Combined with the equity in the house, which we would need to negotiate, either selling it and dividing the proceeds or having one party buy out the other. I was not, as Gerald had perhaps hoped, destitute. I was not destitute at all. That realization was its own kind of quiet power. I drove home from Patricia's office on a gray November afternoon, and I thought about Renee's text message. "I never wanted to hurt you, woman to woman. and I almost laughed. Not bitterly, almost with pity. She did not understand what she had married into. She did not understand yet what 38 years of a shared financial life actually meant when it was legally unwound. She would. They came on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after that phone call, without warning. I was in the backyard pulling up the last of the autumn garden. Frost had taken everything by then, but I find comfort in working with my hands in soil, even dead soil. When I heard the doorbell, I came around the side of the house with my gloves still on and found Gerald and Renee standing on my front porch. Not with aggression. That was the first thing I noticed. They were not dressed for a confrontation. Gerald was wearing the blue sweater I had given him for his birthday 4 years ago, and something about that detail made my jaw tighten in a way I kept off my face. Renee had brought a plant, a small potted succulent in a terracotta pot. A peace offering so literal it might have been comedic under different circumstances. "Dorothy," Gerald said, "we just want to talk." I looked at them both for a moment. I noticed how Gerald had positioned himself slightly in front of Renee. Not protectively, but as a kind of opening argument, presenting himself first, the familiar face, the decades of shared history. It was deliberate. Everything about this visit was deliberate. Then I stepped aside and let them in. This was a calculated decision. I had spoken to Claire the day prior about exactly this possibility, that they might attempt direct contact, and she had advised me that I could engage in informal conversation as long as I made no commitments, signed nothing, and reported the substance of any discussion to her afterward. I was not required to speak to them. But I wanted to hear what they had decided to say. I wanted to understand what they thought their strongest argument was, because knowing your opponent's best case is more useful than avoiding it. I did not offer coffee. We sat in the living room, Gerald and Renee on what remained of my furniture, me in the armchair I had moved from the bedroom. The succulent sat on the coffee table between us like a tiny, absurd mediator. Gerald spoke first and did what Gerald had always done when he wanted something. He was reasonable. He was measured. He acknowledged that he had handled things not ideally. He said he had been going through something. He did not specify what, and had made decisions under emotional pressure that had been unfair to me. He said he and Renee were not asking me to forgive anything, simply to consider an alternative to the nuclear option that attorneys and courts represented. His voice had a practiced quality to it, like a speech rehearsed enough times to sound spontaneous. He slid a folder across the coffee table. Inside was a document. Not a legal filing, not executed, not notarized, but a draft settlement proposal apparently prepared by Dennis, which Gerald now presented as a fair and generous resolution. The house would be listed immediately and proceeds split equally. Gerald would retain his 401k in full. I would keep my own retirement account. The $30,000 I had transferred would be treated as a settlement advance. There would be no spousal support. I read it once, all the way through, without speaking. I read slowly and carefully, the way I had learned to read anything Gerald presented to me as straightforward. Then I set it back on the table. "Dorothy," Renee said, leaning forward slightly. Her voice had the warmth of someone who has rehearsed warmth. "I know this has been painful. I genuinely do. But think about what this legal process is doing to both of you. The fees alone. You're both losing money every week this continues. Gerald has told me about your retirement concerns, and I just think—" She touched Gerald's arm, a small, intimate gesture that I understood was deliberate, designed for my benefit rather than his comfort. There's a way for everyone to walk away with their dignity intact and enough to build something new. You've worked hard your whole life, Dorothy. You deserve peace. This gives you peace. Peace. She had used that word carefully. She meant accept less and stop fighting. I looked at her. Then I looked at Gerald. "Gerald," I said, You have a 401k worth approximately $230,000. This document proposes you keep all of it. Do you think that's equitable after 38 years of marriage, given that I reduced my own earning capacity multiple times to support your career? Given that I worked part-time for 6 years so you could build your client base? Given that I managed every aspect of our household for nearly 4 decades? Gerald's reasonableness developed a hairline crack. Dorothy, we both worked. This is not— Do you think that's equitable? I said again, simply. I kept my voice level. I had discovered in recent weeks that a calm, repeated question is more unsettling to someone trying to be charming than any raised voice could be. Renee tried once more, and this time the warmth in her voice was gone entirely, replaced by something more efficient and considerably less pleasant. If you go to court, she said, it will take years. 2 years minimum, probably more. Do you have the resources to sustain that? Because Gerald has spoken to Dennis about the storage unit, and there are some financial matters there that— She paused, just long enough, letting the silence do the work she wanted it to do. Might complicate your position considerably. The storage unit, the one I had put a star next to in my notepad weeks ago, the one I had already visited, the one whose contents I had already photographed and handed to Claire. She wanted me to flinch. She had constructed that sentence specifically to produce a flinch, the dropped eyes, the quick intake of breath, the visible recalculation of a woman who realizes someone has information she does not. I looked at Renee Baxter steadily and gave her nothing. I'd encourage you both to communicate through Claire Devereaux from this point forward, I said, standing. I won't be signing or agreeing to anything today. Gerald stood too, and the reasonableness was entirely gone now. His face had shifted into something older and harder, the face of a man who is accustomed to getting the outcome he has decided on. You're making a serious mistake, he said. I am trying to be fair here, Dorothy. I'm extending an olive branch and you are choosing to burn it. No, I said, you're trying to be fast. There's a difference, a significant one. He left without the folder. Renee picked up her succulent on the way out. She actually took the plant back, which I found so perfectly revealing that I nearly said something. And then they were gone, and I heard Gerald's car door close with more force than necessary. I locked the door and stood in my hallway for a long moment. And I will be honest, my hands were shaking. Not from weakness, from the particular adrenaline of standing your ground when something large and familiar is pressing hard against it. They had mentioned the storage unit deliberately and specifically. They had something there, or believed they did, that they thought could destabilize me, and they had let me know it without naming it, which is the textbook definition of a threat designed to be deniable. I walked to the kitchen. I filled a glass of water and drank it at the counter and looked out the window at the backyard, at my garden, at the bare November beds. Was I afraid? Yes. A cold, real fear. The kind that sits at the base of your sternum and does not immediately move. They had come into my home with a plant and a folder, and had left me with a warning. 2 people who had already demonstrated they were willing to deceive and conceal and redirect. What else were they willing to do? But here is what settled the fear, slowly, and then all at once. They had come to me. They had dressed carefully and rehearsed their lines and brought a peace offering to a woman they had wronged because they were worried about what that woman might do. They had mentioned the storage unit to frighten me away from it, which meant they did not know I had already been there. People who are winning do not come to the person they are winning against and ask them to stop. They came because they were losing, and that knowledge, quiet and certain as anything I had ever known, straightened my spine and steadied my hands and sent me to the phone to call Claire. The storage unit on Reed Road. I had been thinking about it since the first night in Michael's guest room. I had put a star next to it. And then, after Renee's deliberate pause, there are some financial matters there. It had moved from a footnote to a priority. I had joint access to the storage unit. Both our names were on the rental agreement, which I confirmed with a phone call to Reed Road Storage the morning after Gerald and Renee's visit. I drove there that same afternoon with a locksmith. The padlock was mine, technically, which the rental agreement confirmed, and I opened it. What I found required me to stand in the doorway for a moment and simply take it in. The unit was not a storage unit in any ordinary sense. It was, I understood slowly, a secondary life. There were 2 large filing cabinets, a portable safe, the small fireproof kind, which I could not open but photographed from every angle. 3 cardboard banker's boxes sealed with packing tape, labeled in Gerald's handwriting. Office Docs, 2018 to 2022. A second small refrigerator. And, stacked against the back wall, a set of furniture I did not recognize. A small dresser, a mirror, a double bed frame, still in the original packaging. I photographed everything. I did not remove anything. I had called Claire from the parking lot before I went in, and she had told me clearly, photograph, document, touch nothing that is not yours, and call me immediately with the inventory. The filing cabinets were unlocked. Inside them, I found what I can only describe in the careful language I have since learned from attorneys and forensic accountants as evidence of financial concealment over an extended period. Bank statements for accounts I had never seen. A brokerage account in Gerald's name alone with a balance, as of the most recent statement, dated 8 months prior, of approximately $104,000. Rental agreements. One of them was for an apartment on Erie Avenue, dated 16 months ago, signed by Gerald. A second signatory, R. Baxter. Renee Baxter. Gerald had been paying rent on an apartment for Renee for 16 months, with marital funds. Money that had been redirected, not dramatically, not in large suspicious amounts, but steadily, in increments of 800 here, 1,000 there, routed through the accounts in this cabinet and away from anything I could see. I sat down on a box and looked at the papers in my hand. This was not merely an affair. This was a sustained, deliberate, legally significant financial scheme. Claire, when I called her, used the term waste of marital assets. She was very quiet on the phone, and then she said, in the measured tone of a person restraining professional excitement, "Dorothy, this changes things substantially." The formal hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. I had not told Gerald what I had found. I had not told Renee. I had photographed everything, provided the originals to Claire's office, and continued to respond to Dennis's correspondence with the same measured pace as always. Gerald, I believe, thought the storage unit threat had worked, that I had been frightened into a corner and was simply stalling. He did not know what was in the corner with me. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Dark navy, minimal jewelry, comfortable shoes for a long day. Michael drove down from Dayton and sat beside me in Claire's car. He did not say much. He is like me in that way. We go quiet when it matters. The conference room in the family court building was institutional and fluorescent and smelled of recycled air. Gerald was already there with Dennis when we arrived. Dennis was a tall man in a good suit who carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who expected to win. Gerald had the look he always had before a difficult conversation, tightly controlled, already rehearsing. Renee was not there, which surprised me. Waiting outside, probably. Or perhaps Gerald had decided it was better optics for her not to attend. Claire set down her briefcase and opened it. And then, with no preliminary, she began. She presented the brokerage account first. Gerald looked at Dennis. Dennis's face changed in the way that faces do when something unexpected arrives, and there is no prepared response for it. He asked for a moment to confer with his client. Gerald leaned toward him and whispered something, and Dennis whispered back, and even in that exchange, even from across the table, I could see the thing collapsing in real time. the version of events they had prepared, the argument they had carefully built, developing sudden structural damage. Then Claire presented the rental agreement. Gerald looked up from the paper and across the table at me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something I had not expected in his face. Not anger, calculation, fading into something closer to recognition. He had underestimated me. He had known it was possible and had thought it unlikely, and now he understood that he had been wrong. "This is," Dennis started, "the provenance of these documents." "Your client had joint access to the storage unit," Claire said, "as did my client. The documents were legally accessible and legally obtained." "We'll need time to review." "Of course," Claire said pleasantly. Gerald said nothing. He was looking at the rental agreement, at his own signature next to Renee's name, and whatever argument he had been planning, whatever leverage he thought the storage unit gave him, was now in front of a mediator and opposing counsel, turned entirely the other direction. Outside in the hallway during the recess, I stood with Michael and said nothing for a while. He got us both coffee from the machine. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I was. That was the truest thing. I was not triumphant, not vengeful, not even particularly relieved yet. I was simply steady. I had done the work. I had done it carefully and legally and with patience. And here we were. We went back inside. The negotiation that followed the hearing lasted 11 days. Not in a courtroom. We did not ultimately go before a judge because Dennis and Claire reached an agreement through mediation, which is common in divorce cases, and in this instance was very much in Gerald's interest, since a judge reviewing the evidence of sustained financial concealment over 16 months would have had considerably less sympathy than a mediator bound to find a workable resolution. I want to be accurate about what I received, because accuracy matters, and because there are women reading this who may one day need to know that math is on their side when they have done the work. The house was appraised at $312,000, with a remaining mortgage of $68,000, leaving equity of $244,000. Gerald had wanted to force a sale. Instead, he agreed to a buyout. I kept the house. I refinanced the mortgage in my name, and Gerald received his share of the equity, $122,000, a clean split, minus a court-recognized offset for the documented waste of marital assets, the 16 months of rent paid to Renee Baxter from marital funds, totaling approximately $15,200. Gerald's equity share was reduced accordingly. The brokerage account, $104,000, hidden for years in a filing cabinet in a storage unit Gerald had assumed I would never investigate, was treated as a marital asset. I received $52,000 from it, which was my equitable share. Gerald's 401k, the largest single asset, was divided via a qualified domestic relations order. I received 40% of the marital portion, which my attorney calculated at approximately $88,000, to be transferred to an IRA in my name. Spousal support? 5 years, given the length of the marriage, my reduced earning history, and my age. $1,400 per month. I also kept my car, my retirement account, the $30,000 I had transferred on the morning after the text message, and this is the detail I find most satisfying in a quiet way, my mother's mixing bowls, which I had already kept, total secured, approximately $300,000 in assets and 5 years of support, plus the house, plus the account I had already moved. It was not a lottery. It was not revenge. It was what 38 years of marriage, carefully documented and legally pursued, was actually worth. Gerald signed the agreement on a Wednesday morning. Dennis looked tired. Gerald looked the way people look when the version of things they had constructed in their minds has been replaced by the version that actually existed, stripped of convenience, stripped of the narrative that had justified everything, left with only the facts of what he had done and what it had cost. He did not speak to me directly. He signed where Dennis indicated, and then he left. I sat with Claire for another 20 minutes, going over the final documents. Then I shook her hand. She had been extraordinary. And I walked out into the November air and called Michael. "It's done," I said. He exhaled in a way that told me he had been holding that breath for weeks. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm good," I said. And then, surprising myself, "I'm actually really good." I drove home. My house, my refinanced, carefully itemized, legally secured house. I went into the kitchen and I stood at the counter where the mixing bowls were, and I made soup from scratch the way my mother had taught me, and I ate it at my own table in my own quiet home. There is a particular peace in having done a hard thing well. I did not feel it as euphoria. I felt it as something steadier, a deep, settled rightness, the way it feels when something that has been wrong for a very long time is finally corrected. Not perfect, not painless, but right. Gerald and Renee. I thought about them briefly that evening, and then I set the thought down. I had other things to think about now. Spring came earlier than usual that year, or perhaps I was simply more aware of it. I planted the garden in late March. Tomatoes, zucchini, the herbs along the south fence that I had always meant to expand and never had. Lily came to visit with Michael and Karen in April, 7 months old by then, and holding her head up with tremendous seriousness, and I sat with her in the backyard on a blanket while Danny ran circles around the vegetable beds, and I thought, this is what the house is for. I had made changes, not dramatic ones. I was not the sort of woman who tears everything down and starts over, but meaningful ones. I repainted the living room, a soft gray-green that I had wanted for years and that Gerald had never liked. I bought a real couch, a good one, the kind I had looked at and passed over for decades because it was too expensive, and we were saving. I hung photographs I had taken over the years, my own photographs, not the formal portraits we had chosen together, and I put them wherever I wanted. Patricia Osei, my financial advisor, had helped me build a picture of what the next 20 years could look like, and it was not the picture I had feared on that first night in Michael's guest room. The IRA, the assets from the settlement, the spousal support, my own retirement account. Managed carefully, I was not only stable, I was, by the modest standards I had always operated by, secure. I began volunteering 2 mornings a week at the library, which I had always wanted to do and for which I had always found reasons to defer. I joined Lynn for a trip to Vermont in October, the first time I had traveled for pleasure with a friend rather than as half of a couple, and I came home rested in a way I had forgotten was possible. I also, in the spring of the following year, began teaching a monthly workshop at the community center. Practical guidance for women navigating divorce later in life. Nothing formal. Just what I knew. Document everything. Find a good attorney. Understand that quiet is not the same as unprepared. Paulette came to the first session. Margaret brought 3 women from her neighborhood. The room was fuller than I expected. I did not seek out news of Gerald and Renee. People told me things anyway because people always do. The apartment on Erie Avenue, the one Gerald had been paying for, had been their romantic vision, apparently. The life they had been building in parallel to mine. Gerald moved in after the divorce was finalized, though by then, the lease was in Renee's name alone, since Gerald's finances had been significantly restructured, and the casual, invisible flow of money that had funded the arrangement no longer existed. They struggled. I do not say this with satisfaction, exactly. I say it as a fact. Gerald was 67 years old, without the financial cushion he had expected, in an apartment he was sharing with a woman who had, I think, believed she was getting a comfortable retirement waiting for her. What she had gotten instead was a man whose hidden brokerage account had been divided, whose 401k had been quartered, who owed spousal support for 5 years, and who was, by all accounts, not a cheerful domestic partner when things were not going as planned. I heard through Paulette, who heard it from someone at Gerald's agency, that Renee had returned to full-time work within a year. I heard, through Evelyn next door, that Gerald had tried to call the house twice in the year following the divorce, once 6 months after, and once just before Christmas. I did not take the calls. There was nothing to say. What I had come to understand, slowly and without drama, was that Gerald had not been the man I thought I knew for 38 years. Or rather, he had been partly, sometimes. But he had also been capable of what he had done, and those two things had always coexisted, and I had chosen, for a very long time, to look at only one of them. That is not a failure. That is the ordinary human tendency to love the version of someone that makes life workable. But I had finished making Gerald's life workable for him. Now I was making mine workable for me. Lynn came for dinner on the last Sunday of April, and we ate at the kitchen table with the window open to the spring air, and she said, "You look different." "Different how?" I asked. She thought about it. "Younger," she said. "But that's not quite it. More like yourself." That was, I thought, exactly it. What I learned is this. A quiet answer is not surrender. Preparation is not revenge. And the most powerful thing a woman can do when someone attempts to take what is hers is to know exactly what she has, and to document it, protect it, and stand behind it without apology. Gerald assumed I was finished. He was wrong. You are never finished. If you are sitting somewhere right now recognizing something in this story, keep your records. Find your attorney. Call the friend who gives you good referrals. Know what is in every account. And when someone underestimates your silence, let them. What would you have done in my place? I'd genuinely like to know. Leave it in the comments. Every story matters. And if this reached you at the right moment, share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for being here.